Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Today I'll be doing my first book review. And then it's like the oh my god, the stories books things. So, this is the first book review. This is the first official start to my channel in my opinion, because this is what I want to do probably most of the time. Plus, you know, like book hauls, because I buy a lot of books. Today I will be reviewing The Game, which is by Linsey Miller. Okay, so I'm going to try to summarize what it's about, but it just might be all over the place, but it's fine. Also, I'm going to try to make this review spoilerless and just kind of go over my general thoughts about it, not specific things, in case you guys want to read it. So this book is basically like what it's called. It's called The Game. So it's about this game called Assassins, and every year at this high school, they play the game. So basically what happens is it's all the seniors and you can sign up to play and you get put on teams. And you get targets, like you have to kill somebody else from another team. Something I thought was really brilliant, it didn't say it on the back, so it was something I got from reading it, but what they use is water guns. So basically like you have to shoot somebody else with a water gun. And you have to like get their schedule down and get them when they're not anticipating it, and you can't kill them when there's other people around. So you need to make sure that they're alone, which then in a game like this is tricky, which is why you have to catch them off guard. So that's a pretty like basic concept, and actually I will say that even if the book had just been about that, I would have been invested and I would have read it. But what ends up happening is that the players of this game, the Assassins game, start to get murdered. Like one by one, in alphabetical order, people are being killed, the ones that are playing this game. So then it becomes this big thing, and the parents don't want their kids playing it, and the school says there's gonna be suspensions if they catch kids playing it. But it's been this tradition for years and years at this school, so you know, kids are they're pretty competitive and they want to keep playing it. So that's kind of the tricky thing about this, is you know that it's somebody in the class. So the main character, she knows that there's somebody that's playing the game that is actually a murderer, because there's no way that they could know who is playing. And so basically it's like one of those Nancy Drew type things where she's trying to figure out who's killing other people, because the police really don't believe her and aren't doing anything, and they don't feel like it's related to this game. So I'm just going to read through my reviews of it, and it's kind of like, while I was reading it, I knew that I wanted to review the book, so I was just putting down bullet points as I was going. So things might be a little bit out of order, but hopefully we can fix most of them with editing. The first thing I'm just gonna say is it does not have good ratings on Goodreads, and I disagree with that. So I looked it up, because I always look it up to say it's what I'm currently reading. Also, remember that my Goodreads is in the description below if you want to go check out what I'm currently reading or what I have been reading. So I always look it up there first, and I noticed, I don't always look at the ratings, but I noticed that it had about an average of 3 stars, maybe even a little bit less, and there was not very many ratings, like probably around 300. So that didn't give me very high hopes for it, and maybe that's why I enjoyed it so much. I'm not gonna say it's not like a masterpiece of the century, but it is a well-written book, and I would recommend reading it if you like things like this. I will say it's the kind of book I wrote down. This was a description of cinnamon rolls in the book. It's the kind of book where descriptions of cinnamon rolls are hot and gooey, the cinnamon filling laced with chopped walnuts and pecans. Like, I just thought that was a very good description, and I will say it's one of those books where certain things are described really well and other things are kind of glazed over, which is an important point that I will bring up later. A negative that I found about this book is that, of course, with books like this, as you know, I'm not a romance person. I wish I was, kind of, I'm not. So there was a predictable, childish romance, in my opinion. It was like the two characters that could put on the same team, and she's liked him since she was in 7th grade and all this stuff, and it was like, oh, he just joined to, you know, wants to get to know her. It was just that kind of a thing where it was just like, you just know that like they're gonna end up together. That shouldn't be a spoiler, because if you've read any book ever, it's very obvious that it's coming, so I just wish there had been some twists and turns in it. My first impressions of this book, when I began to read it, was that they jumped in really well. I always find starting a book is the hardest, and especially like the first half of a book, I'd probably take at least twice as long to read than I do the second half. I will say I read the first 30 pages one night, and then I read the entire rest of the book the next night, and there's 240 pages in it, so it takes a lot for me to do that sometimes, but this was one that I knew that I wanted to finish. So as I said, they did a very good job of jumping right in. There was a lot of character development, it was very suspenseful, and Like I said earlier, I actually would have just been interested in just the game of the assassins. Like, I was reading for a couple chapters before anything suspicious started happening, and I was really invested, and then when something happened, I was like, oh my god, like, what's going on? And then I was like, yeah, that's the point of the book. Like, I completely forgot it was about anything other than this game, because the main character is very invested in the game, which was a very smart move on the author's point. I guess it makes sense. You wouldn't want to have a main character that didn't really care, but she's got, I won't spoil anything, like I said, but she's got very deep reasons for being obsessed with this game. So I liked that about it, and I liked that she was probably the most competitive out of everybody, which also meant that people assumed that she was the killer because she was the one that was the most invested. Something interesting about this book that I had to note, it was one of the first things that I wrote down, is it's the first book I've ever read where basically a main character, I would say a high secondary character, was non-binary, and they didn't make a big deal about it. They never said anything other than, I was reading and I kind of got confused because it's on the very first page. This character says, Jem put their hand on blah blah blah, and I was really confused for a minute, and then I realized they're non-binary. And it was really refreshing to see something like that, and I was surprised because most people would be like, oh yeah, and this person became non-binary in this grade because this thing, like, and they just kind of brushed over that, and it was like, it was always that way, and I really thought that that was very 21st century of them. The only comment that was ever made about that person being non-binary is there was somebody who I would say was a little bit socially inept, and they said, oh yeah, you're gonna get into good universities because you're diverse, but they didn't mean it in that way, and they kind of got called out for it, but anyways, that was the only thing that was kind of off kilter. The other thing kind of relating to that is, it's again the first book I've read where very casually they talked about two characters being gay, where they just said, oh yeah, well I think he's dating Ryan, when they were talking about one of their targets, and again, brushed past it. And then there was another point brought up where it said, oh yeah, well I'll have to ask my dads. And so then it was like, oh, they're being raised by two men, but again, never mentioned again. And I just thought that that was really cool to have that much diversity within one book and not make a huge deal out of it. Like, it was a very small plot line of the book, but it just kind of normalized it, which obviously I'm young, it's normal for me, but for some other people reading it, I just thought it was a nice break from the normals of society. So I mentioned earlier about how there were certain descriptions that were very, very descriptive and other ones that were kind of brushed over. And the reason I want to talk about that again is one of the biggest negatives in this book, in my opinion, was that I found that the killer was obvious. It was only obvious, it's hard to explain why without spoiling anything, but there's just, it would be like, oh, this person, blah, 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 and then they'd spend a paragraph talking about this other person, and then there'd be a detail in that paragraph that I was like, why would they mention that? And then halfway through the book, it was like, oh, that's why. And then you know before literally anybody else who the killer is and like what's going on in the book. So that was a little bit frustrating. I had hoped that it was like a plot twist and it was like, oh, you think it's this person, it's actually this person, but it wasn't. So I would probably recommend, if you are interested in reading this book, I might say don't be expecting it to be this huge plot twist or anything like that. Like, you want to make sure that either you don't read a lot of mystery books. I read basically only mystery books, and I was obsessed with Nancy Drew growing up, so not to call myself a detective or anything, but I found it quite easy to tell who the perpetrator was. But maybe if you're not into things as much like that, you would enjoy it more. That's basically all I can say on that. Within this book, I grew up in a very small community, and especially my elementary school. It was grades 1 to 6, and then about halfway through it turned into K to 6. And like, there was only one class for each grade, but my grade passing through was actually double. So they always had to like stretch the classes to make them 2, and then once we passed, they'd combine it into 1 again, just because there was so many in my class. But I really liked the small school aspect, and within this book it was also a small school, so I found that that was interesting to play a game like this where everybody kind of knows everybody, and I liked that feeling of it. The only thing I would say as kind of a warning is that there were very graphic depictions of the murders. It's nothing like unmanageable, but I'm not a big fan of gore. I think it was something, it's more I can read it, but I don't think I could watch it. So if you don't like stuff like that, or if you're sensitive to stuff like that, it might be a trigger for you, so don't read it. But the good part about that, in my opinion, was at the same time, the reactions of the characters I found were very realistic. It wasn't like, you know, they just jumped into action. It was like, you know, some of them threw up and some of them fainted, and like there were just certain things that I thought was a really good depiction and made it actually feel like they were real people and not just characters in a book, so I did enjoy that. I know that there are certain books that are like this. This is not the first one, but Leah's parents are awful. That's the main character's name. I hated her parents. They were horrible. They were awful people, and almost to the point that I found it unrealistic. Same way that I found their characters' reactions were realistic, I find the way that her parents act very unrealistic. Maybe I have just been spoiled and grew up with great parents. I know that I have great parents, but I'm just saying that her parents were really not good, to the point that I feel like that was a flaw on the author's point of view. They were so bad. Like, they were literally so bad. Like, I don't even know how to describe like how bad they were. Like, they were like bad. They were like Harry Potter's like bullies. Bad. Yes. Literally. Another negative that I found about this book is there was kind of random segues in between anecdotes. There wasn't really anything in between to kind of link them together, which at some point I thought, oh, maybe that's important, but then there's a lot of random sentences that weren't important, which I think was to probably distract from the stuff that was important. But like I said, I figured out very quickly who the killer was, and actually within the first chapter, maybe first 2 chapters, I was like, oh, I bet that person's gonna be the killer, and then they were. Again, if you haven't read a lot of mystery things, like it wasn't super obvious, but yeah, there were some hints definitely along the way. And then it was one of those books that was frustrating because they're like, oh gee, I wonder who it could be. And I was like, you idiot, of course it's this thing, because that's the only thing that was pointed out to us. So that's about as vague as I could possibly be, but I just don't want to spoil anything. About halfway through, a lot of the main characters have this sleepover, which I thought was kind of random. I wished that they'd had it closer to the beginning, because it was like people were dying and it was just like a very serious point, and then they were like, oh, let's all hang out, and then they had a sleepover and talked about college, and the 2 people that liked each other got closer, and it was good for character development, but I found it strange that it happened when it did and not near the beginning, so you could get to know the characters. This is the only thing I will spoil. It is a tiny little thing, doesn't even matter. It says on the back that it's an alphabetical order that the people are being murdered in, but it's both first and last names. Like, I don't want to spoil anything again, but like the first person that's killed, their initials are AA, and then the second person is BB. Like, and I just found it strange that, especially in such a small school, there were so many people. There weren't like that many people murdered, but there was enough to the point that I was like, why are there so many people with first and last names starting with the same letter? And it made me think of like Stan Lee, because people always talk about how like Peter Parker, he often does that alliteration. I just found it strange when it's supposed to be a realistic book that there were so many people that had first and last names that matched. And again, I wish it didn't say on the back that it was alphabetical, because it's about probably 3/4 through the book that they realize, oh my gosh, the killings are in alphabetical order. And it was similar to them going, I wonder who the killer is, where Leah's like writing out each person's name and trying to be like, what is connecting these people? And she's writing them in alphabetical order. And it's just like so obvious to look at. And she even says that she's writing it down and then looking at it. And I just don't understand how you don't recognize its alphabetical order. It was like this big realization. It was like, oh my gosh, but it's so obvious. But maybe it was just obvious because it says right on the back alphabetical order, so who knows. My final thoughts about this book is that it's very similar to Pretty Little Liars. So I really like Pretty Little Liars. If you like Pretty Little Liars, you'll probably like this. There were a lot of reasons, but you know, there's the classic like black hoodie with the hood up, so that really made me think of it. And yeah, I think that this book deserves a higher rating on Goodreads. I personally gave it 4 stars, which 5 stars is normally like would talk about it to anybody for hours. 4 stars is I read it, I enjoyed reading it, I would read it again. 3 stars is I read it, I don't know that I would read it again, and so on. So I gave it 4 stars. I would probably read it again, except I find mysteries hard to read again because I already know everything that's gonna happen. But yeah, the characters were very easy to relate to. The coolest concept that I found about this book was that the game was already about stalking and killing people. So it was like she would see somebody outside her window and go, okay, is this the person that's murdering people, or is this somebody that's looking to shoot me with a water gun? And so there's just multiple times throughout the book where you don't know, is this somebody that wants to kill her, or is it somebody that's just, she's their target, somebody else that's also playing the game? So I found that very interesting because it just made it a little bit more realistic, where for somebody who might be like paranoid about something, it's like, okay, is this person actually a threat, or am I just being crazy and it's just the game? I think that that's all for my first review. Again, this is called The Game by Linsey Miller. I rated it 4 stars on Goodreads, and feel free to check that out. My link will be in the description below. And I hope you guys enjoyed this review. Comment down below more books that you would like me to review, and I will see you guys next time. Bye guys!